Hi, I'm Tim.
I'm Corinne.
We know we're human, and we're hoping that some of you are still human. So we're going to draw some blood, fire up the flamethrowers, and discuss John Carpenter's The Thing from 1982.
12 men have just discovered something. For 100,000 years, it was buried in the snow and ice. Now it has found a place to live. Inside. Where no one can see it, or hear it, or feel it.
I know I'm human. Some of you are still human. This thing doesn't want to show itself. It wants to hide inside an imitation. It'll fight if it has to, but it's vulnerable out in the open. If it takes us over, then it has no more enemies. Nobody left to kill it. And then it's won.
You guys gonna listen to Gary? He can beat one of those things!
Antarctica, winter 1982. The isolation and boredom experienced by a 12-man research team at U.S. Outpost 31 is broken by an encounter with the crazed survivors of a neighboring Norwegian camp, who are killed while attempting to destroy a fleeing dog. The men discover too late that the dog is actually an alien organism that the Norwegians discovered buried in the ice, a being that absorbs and imitates other life forms. As circumstances reveal that the creature has already infected at least one of the men, helicopter pilot R.J. McCready reluctantly takes command to determine who's who and prevent the alien from assimilating the whole team and escaping to civilization, where it could take over all life on Earth. As usual, we'll be discussing The Thing in detail, so if you haven't seen the movie, we highly recommend watching it before listening to the rest of this episode. Okay, what's your first experiences with this movie?
The first time I saw this movie was 6 months ago or so. I don't remember if we were watching it in preparation for recording and just never got to it, or if we watched it during one of our many movie marathons. But it was, and still is, because I've seen it several times since then, one of the creepiest films I've ever seen.
For me, I remember seeing the TV version late one night with my mother, one of those cases where she let me stay up late to watch it. And it really creeped me out to the point where, after the movie, I kept kind of giving her the side eye, wondering, all right,
is my mother human?
Is she who she says she is? And, of course, I've seen it just dozens of times since then. I absolutely love it. It's disgusting and creepy as it is. It's one of my comfort movies.
Yeah.
It was released by Universal on June 25th, 1982, where it opened against Megaforce and Blade Runner. And the summer of 1982 was just huge for movies, especially sci-fi ones. I mean, you had, besides Blade Runner, Conan the Barbarian, Tron, Star Trek II, just a whole ton of amazing stuff. Unfortunately, it opened at number 8 because it was crushed by E.T., which had been out for about a month and showed no signs of slowing at the box office. And along with that, there was Rocky III, Poltergeist, just tons of movies that unfortunately ended up with this one not finding much of an audience.
We don't have very many years when genre films just dominate. And not just genre films, but genre films that change the direction of cinema.
Yeah, I mean, so many of the movies that released that summer are now considered classics and really seminal, important stuff. Mm-hmm. It is kind of an interesting confluence of talent that particular summer. But as a result, certain movies kind of fall by the wayside. Blade Runner was one of them, and certainly this one, to the point where John Carpenter was kind of vilified after it came out. I mean, the critics hated it, the horror fans hated it, nobody really liked it.
Which is a shame. It is a beautiful film. It is just gorgeously directed, and the lighting is incredible. The idea of the paranoia and isolation, it's all very uncomfortable in all the right ways.
And for horror movies at that time, it's very clever, it's very subtle. It's a movie that really rewards repeat viewings because the more you watch it, the more you pick up on a lot of the subtle clues and details as to what's going on.
Yeah, I think one of the things that this and Blade Runner both suffered from in this particular summer is that they weren't straight genre movies. Both of them were sci-fi or horror, or both, with something else as its focus. And I think both of them was mostly just a mystery, just a whodunit, or who is it.
The movie was shot for a budget of $15 million and ended up only grossing $19.6 million. It's based on the novel Who Goes There by Joseph W. Campbell, which was previously adapted as The Thing from Another World way back in 1951 by Howard Hawks, which was one of John Carpenter's favorite films. He actually included it in Halloween, playing on the horror movie marathon as Michael Myers is stalking everybody. Yeah. First off, of course, we have Kurt Russell playing R.J. McCready.
It breaks my heart watching this now because he is such a baby. Such a baby in this movie. And Big Trouble in Little China wasn't too many years later, and he looks so much older, and I don't know what it is about this movie, but he just looks like a child. He looks like he might be 19, but he isn't. He can't be. It makes me feel old seeing him so young.
But as heroes go, it's, again, kind of a subtle characterization. He's very quiet and even-tempered for a lot of the movie, which is interesting from a hero point of view.
He isn't the person you would think really had a handle on all of this. When we meet him for the first time, he's drinking J&B, and he's playing chess with the computer, and he claims the computer has cheated, and he pours the whiskey into the machine.
Your move. Bishop to knight 4. My move, knight to rook 3.
Poor baby, you're starting to lose it, aren't you?
Your move, king to rook 1. My move, rook to knight 6. Checkmate. Checkmate.
Cheating bitch.
So he's a sore loser, but he does play chess, and I think that's pretty important. The idea that he thinks 2 or 3 steps ahead. He really is into strategy.
Yeah, we see the Thing and him kind of play that game out in real life as the movie goes on.
Absolutely.
But also, I like that Russell isn't afraid to make this guy terrified at points, too. Especially that last scene in the movie where he's waiting for the Thing to strike, and he's sitting there holding this thing of dynamite, and you can tell he's just terrified as to what's about to happen. He's not facing it with this brave kind of demeanor. He's scared for his life.
I don't think that any of them are outright military. I think they are all scientists and support staff. And because he's a pilot, I think it makes MacReady support staff.
Well, it's interesting that it's never really spoken aloud in the movie, but Carpenter and Russell kind of devised this backstory for the character that he was like a Vietnam vet and a pilot, and basically went to Antarctica to kind of get away from it all. That whatever happened in the war, it kind of alienated him from everybody else, and he decided he'd go here where he doesn't have to deal with anybody. And to the point where his quarters, he has this shack that's far away from everybody else in the camp, where he can kind of get away from everyone and isolate himself even further.
I'm really glad that was just backstory. It makes sense with his character. It would flesh it out, but I didn't need to know that kind of thing to enjoy his character. I liked not knowing if who I'm seeing is really the hero, or how much does he actually know? How intelligent is this man? I don't know. And I like that questioning.
I also like that we see, even before he really takes command, he has very strong leadership qualities. I mean, it's his decision when it comes to flying to go to the Norwegian camp. He's the one who has to make the decision. He's the one who kind of grasps...
he's the pilot. He's the person who's going to bring them there. So it's his call. It's his aircraft.
But also, he's the one who kind of grasps what's happening with the Thing after Bennings gets killed and Gary can't handle it, but MacReady is.
My God, what was happening to him?
I think if it had more time to finish, it would have looked and sounded and acted just like Bennings.
I don't know what you're saying.
There was one of those things out there trying to imitate him, Gary. Come on.
MacReady, I know Bennings. I've known him for 10 years. He's my friend.
You gotta burn the rest of them.
He's already dealing with it in his mind. Okay, this creature has just killed somebody. It's somewhere loose in the camp. We have to deal with it. We have to make plans. In the original cut of the movie, the idea was it was going to be more of an ensemble piece, and Russell would slowly come to the fore as the film went on. And while they were test screening the movie and revising it, they decided to put him out front a little bit earlier. So they reshot some things, like that great speech he has around the fire about how, I know I'm human and some of you are still human. That scene where he talks to Gary about Bennings being one of the things, a lot of those were added to kind of put Russell forward a little bit earlier and let the audience know, okay, this is the guy you're going to be watching.
Yeah.
Next is Wilford Brimley playing Blair, which this is a far cry from like the oatmeal ads and Cocoon that we might be used to Wilford Brimley from. This was actually one of his first movies. He'd only been in one other movie before this, Absence of Malice, and that actually hadn't been released yet when he was cast in this. So he was pretty much a fresh face, despite getting into acting a little later in his life.
I think he did a great job. I think the one big scene that stands out is when he's attacking all of the equipment, when we don't know if he's human and he's trying to keep everybody at the camp so that the alien doesn't reach humanity, or if he's an alien trying to sabotage them so that he can assimilate all of them. We've no idea. We just know that he's freaking out. He's destroyed the radio. He's destroyed the helicopter. He's just going mad. But the way he plays it, you can't tell if he is mad or if he's pretending to be mad.
Yeah, one of the theories is that he's trying to get himself isolated from the rest of the group so he can start building his flying saucer that'll be revealed later on. And I can't remember. I think in the original story it's implied that that was the case. Mm-hmm. But I do like that it's played very ambiguous here. And that up to that point, Blair is a very kind of static figure. When he goes on these long speeches explaining what it is, he doesn't emote very much and keeps a lot of his suspicions about how much danger they're in kind of to himself.
Yeah.
Are you saying to me the dog wasn't put in the kennel until last night?
Right.
How long were you alone with that dog?
I don't know, an hour and a half, maybe. What the hell are you looking at me like that for?
I don't know.
What?
I don't know. It's probably nothing. It's nothing at all.
Most of the characters keep everything pretty close to the chest. We learn about the characters more through mannerisms and things that they gravitate toward, like their personal items, than we do from what they're saying.
Before Brimley, Donald Pleasance was actually considered for the part, but Carpenter decided that Pleasance was a little too distinctive and well-known, that he wanted you to kind of forget about Blair for a good middle chunk of the movie while they're doing the blood tests and everything like that, and thought...
And you do. I honestly forgot. Like, I kept getting Copper and Blair mixed up because, you know, they're both a little older, a little heavier. They're both quiet, science-type people, and I have seen this several times, and I still need a list of the characters to keep them straight, because they are all so, I don't want to say interchangeable, but they are all very much everymen.
Yeah, they're not movie stars,
right.
They're not leading men kind of types, they are very blue-collar looking guys. It's funny because now watching this, I keep expecting Blair to break out into an ad for Quaker Oats or something. The right thing to do, get it?
It's the right thing to do.
Just like grabbing a thing of Quaker Oats, doing that hand over the face thing and forcing them down somebody's throat. Then we have Keith David as Childs. I love Keith David. This guy is just awesome.
I don't remember Keith David from anything, though I'm pretty sure I've seen him in many places because I recognize his voice, but his character, he just doesn't like anyone. We don't even know if anything is going on yet. We're at the very beginning of the film, and he already is distrustful. It's his character who lets me know they've been at this base for way too long. He's already starting to get cabin fever and paranoia. And of course, getting a little off topic, McGreedy is already drinking heavily.
Yeah.
So, the isolation is really getting to them.
Well, which is funny because early in the movie we see Childs smoking a joint with Palmer. So you think he'd be a little bit more relaxed, but quite the opposite.
Well, there's, people can be paranoid after smoking
very true,
pot. So, or it could be a coping mechanism, a way for him to attempt to relax.
And his paranoia, it's funny, you'd almost expect in this situation that not trusting anybody would be the way to go, but he illustrates why it's a terrible way to go, and why he shouldn't have been the leader when Gary finally gives up command, why it's a good thing that McCready took it instead of him.
Well, Childs would have been very, very quick to shoot, he's any wrong move. And in a way, he may have been the best character to choose as leader. We very well may not have had that ambiguous ending had Childs been the leader, because he would have shot everybody.
That's true. I love how in scenes you'll see him turn on people at the drop of a hat. Like the scene when McCready is outside the door after Knowles cuts him loose.
Let's open it. Hell no. You think he's changed into one of those things?
Nothing human could have made it back here in this weather without a guideline.
Let's open it now.
Why are you so damn anxious to let him in here?
Because they're so close. Maybe our best chance to blow it away.
No! Just let him freeze to death outside.
Childs, what if we're wrong about him?
Why then we're wrong?
I think Childs would have had everybody tied up and shot as soon as they made one wrong move. And that's not necessarily a bad thing in this situation. It's kind of a lose-lose situation.
Yeah. As for Keith David, some of the things you might have seen him in, of course, he worked with Carpenter again in They Live, where he participates in one of the greatest fight scenes ever.
Okay, so that's probably where I remember him from.
He also appeared in Platoon. He was in Men at Work, the co-worker of Charlie Sheen and Emilio Estevez, the Vietnam vet who keeps giving them trouble.
I haven't seen that since I was a child.
The Puppet Masters and Imam in Pitch Black. Mm-hmm. And he's the voice of Goliath on Gargoyles.
Oh, so that's how we know his voice.
Yep. His voice is so distinctive. He does tons of
He's
ads,
a gorgeous voice.
Lots of cartoons, video games, everything. Other candidates for the part included Isaac Hayes, who had just worked with Carpenter on Escape from New York, and Ernie Hudson, a couple of years before Ghostbusters.
I think they would have both been good choices, but they're not quite the right fit for this part.
They don't have the edge that Keith David has. This edge of he can be very dangerous, that you feel like this is not a guy you want to piss off, and that's really what you needed for this part. Also, David broke his arm during production and had to wear a cast, and there's a lot of scenes where his character is wearing gloves for no reason, even when they're indoors. And there's that one scene when Blair's going nutty and he has to kind of hide behind Kurt Russell, and you can just see the flesh-colored glove that he's wearing that doesn't quite look right.
I wouldn't have noticed anything unless you'd said it, and once you did, I kept watching, and he would hide that arm, which was difficult because that was his camera-facing arm most of the time they were shooting, but he did a great job. It was only when I knew and I started looking that I could see, oh, look, that's really not his hand.
Yeah, he managed to make it look
did a great job.
Pretty natural, yeah. There's Donald Moffat playing Gary, the commander of the base. Moffat's actually British, which always surprises me. He sounds American. He also appeared in The Right Stuff, where he played Lyndon Johnson, Regarding Henry and Clear and Present Danger, and is great at playing authority figures, especially kind of shady ones.
Yeah, he has that look where he would end up playing a lot of military.
I kept looking at him thinking he looks like he should be a Republican presidential candidate. Something about him just...
There are so many right now, he may as well jump in.
And Gary's kind of subdued as a commander. You get the sense he does have a military background, but he probably hasn't really had to make much in the way of decisions at this base, that he can kind of just let these people do their jobs and stay in the background. So when he's finally forced to make heavy decisions, he kind of loses it.
He's another one of those characters who, because he is so quiet and in the background, is like, wait, who's this guy again? Oh, yes. Oh, okay. Well, which I like, and I know it makes it difficult to talk about the movie, but it adds to that who is missing, who isn't here, who is that person. It helps the audience be drawn into the suspicion and paranoia.
Yeah. I do like how Gary, every once in a while, will have to assert himself in a scene, like when they're coming up with the first idea for the first blood test.
Yes.
And everyone else has already made the decision. He's like, yeah, get to work on that. Here's my keys, go. Early candidates for the part included Lee Van Cleef, who also had just worked with Carpenter on Escape from New York, Jerry Orbach, and Kevin Conway. But I think Moffat is the perfect choice.
Yeah, sometimes when we look at alternate castings, I wonder, why wasn't that person cast? But so far, I think the right cast was here.
I could picture Jerry Orbach doing an interesting job with it,
but I think he'd bring a different flavor to it.
I think he would have been more commanding, which is not really what you want for that role.
He has a presence that's completely different from Donald Moffat's. I don't think he could have subdued his presence enough.
Yeah, I don't think so either. Playing Knowles, the camp cook, is T.K. Carter. Carter mostly was known for comedies at this point. He had done Seems Like Old Times with Chevy Chase and Goldie Hawn, Dr. Detroit with Dan Aykroyd, A Rage in Harlem, and Southern Comfort, bit of a drama there. Considered for the part originally was comedian Franklin Ajaye. He had met about taking the role, but ended up criticizing the characterization of Knowles in the screenplay. He thought it was a black stereotype, and that's something that T.K. Carter complained about during shooting as well, although I think that's part of the point. The character is playing the stereotype for all these authority people around him, playing what he thinks they expect him to be. You get the sense all of that is this feigned thing that he's doing kind of to make fun of these people, like when he's constantly calling Gary Buana and things like that.
Well, that's not long enough for guys to go bunkers.
Bullshit, Buana. 5 minutes is enough to put a man over down here.
Damn straight.
I mean, look at Palmer. He been the way he is since the first day.
Okay, so you think that his way of dealing with all of this isolation is to create a character for himself, a character that is more in line with perceived racial stereotypes.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay, that's going in a completely different direction than I would have gone with this character, but I get it. I like that you're trying to, or you have made it into a character choice for reasons that would give the character a lot more depth than we are actually shown. I don't think Knowles was portrayed very well character-wise in general.
He's not very fleshed out.
Not at all. I think I learned more about him from that he was in roller skates and that he listened to Stevie Wonder more from anything that he said or did in the whole film. Just the idea of this guy who likes to roller skate and listen to Stevie Wonder is stuck in Antarctica, and that's just the disconnect there. But I love it. I love the idea that this guy somehow ended up in Antarctica.
That little gesture of him, like, sure, I'll turn it down. He just almost gestures at the radio without actually hitting the volume button, like, that's enough, and walks away.
Why would you ask to turn down Stevie? That's not right.
I agree. And then as things get more intense, he drops that and becomes more serious. And I like that he actually almost lasts to the end.
Yeah, that's something that this movie subverts, the, black guy dies first trope. And our two characters who are black in this film survive very near to the end, one of them all the way to the end. It's very strange for film of that time. Yeah,
Null's might be the one weak point in the movie, in that him wandering off is one of those kind of audience, what are you doing? Don't go down that darkened corridor with creepy noises thing.
But you've also got to think, he is a cook. And that doesn't mean he's less intelligent, because he absolutely isn't. But this isn't his field. I'm not sure he understood how dangerous it is. It's one of those, these people who are specializing in this, they have it controlled, or nothing's going to happen to me, because he's a young guy. And I don't know about you, but when I was much younger, it was like, I'm invincible. I can walk down this dark alley. Nothing's going to happen.
That's true. Part of it, I think, is that his death scene is missing because the effect didn't work. Originally, he was going to wander down there and see Gary's legs kicking. I think the idea is that he hears Gary and goes down to make sure that he's all right. And then he just sees the legs kicking behind this box, and then the Blair thing comes out of the box and grabs him.
Yeah.
And because they apparently they tried to shoot the effect and it didn't work, they had to cut it out. So he just wanders off. And on the one hand, I like that ambiguity, that he wanders off, we don't see it, but we know he's gone. That's it.
In that moment, we become more in the character's point of view. We're not omnipotent. We don't know what happened to him, and we never find out.
I also love his reaction during the blood test when he's cleared. That look of deliverance on his face. That smile, thank God.
It was like he didn't even know if he was real. His level of suspicion went as far down to his very own cells.
And the very next shot is him with the flamethrower pointing it at Childs with this look of, I'm ready to torch you any second now. He's kind of empowered by this fact that now he knows he's okay and everybody else knows he's okay.
Yeah. And they each have that same reaction, like, yes, I'm okay. And the only person who doesn't, actually, there are two people. McCready, of course, he's like, well, I know I'm human. Mm-hmm. And then the very last person who's tested, Gary, who I'm sure he knew he was human, and he was just mad. He just wanted to be untied, and he screamed at them. And I think it's really the only time anybody screams at another character in anger.
There's a little bit earlier, but it's the loudest, and it is probably the best line and most loved line of the movie.
I know you gentlemen have been through a lot, but when you find the time, I'd rather not spend the rest of this winter tied to this fucking couch!
We have Charles Hallahan playing Norris. Hallahan's one of those guys, you just recognize his face from tons of movies. He had roles in Twilight Zone, the movie, and the opening Vic Morrow story, Silkwood, The Fan with Robert De Niro, and Dante's Peak. And he's kind of that quiet, introverted scientist who, again, is content to blend into the background, which is handy once we find out he's one of these things, and that's kind of what he's been doing the whole time.
Yeah, I called him the mousy guy, and I love that Gary wanted to put Norris in charge. So Gary wanted to put the monster in charge.
But I guess you'll all feel a little easier if somebody else was in charge. Norris, I can't see anybody objecting to you.
I'm sorry, fellas, but I'm not up to it.
Of course, this monster's like, oh, no, not me being Norris, because that's the kind of reaction Norris would have, but it helps the monster in that it keeps him in the background. Nobody's looking to him for decisions. He's not in power, therefore, don't look at me over here.
That does lead to an interesting question. It's one I've never really been able to come out with one way or the other. Does the thing, when turns into a human person and imitates a human, does it know it's the thing, or does it fool itself into thinking it's human?
Well, The way the dog was behaving at the beginning, much more intelligently than a dog could behave. He was observing the humans, he stayed close, he would corner a human while they were alone. I think that if it's not fully conscious, it's definitely there.
Because I noticed, especially in Hallahan's performance, there's a lot of moments like when the dog's in the rec room, moving around all the men, and it leaves the room, watch Hallahan, and he kind of looks at it out of the corner of his eye, almost like it's, oh, okay, I know what he's doing. Like, it's unclear whether he's been taken over at that point, but there's just that little hint. Or any of the scenes he has with Palmer later on, when the two of them are almost a double act, talking about how MacReady could have been taken over. It could have been when the lights went out, that would have been the perfect time. Yeah, that these two guys are bolstering the suspicion of MacReady, which makes it seem like to me that they know who they are and what they're doing. Next is David Clennon as Palmer, the other revealed thing in the movie. Clennon is known for his role in the TV program 30-something and films such as Missing, The Right Stuff, Light Sleeper, and Gone Girl. And he kind of reminds me of Harry Dean Stanton from Alien, the not totally there mechanic guy who's very laid back and philosophical, and in this case, the pothead. The conspiracy theory guy pothead. Because he's so laid back, anytime he actually shows real emotion, like when he's disgusted at having to tie up the bodies or anything like that, it kind of has a little bit more impact. And when they find out about the UFO, he jumps into the whole Chariots of the Gods speech.
Happens all the time, man. They're falling out of the skies like flies. Government knows all about it, right, Mac? Chariots of the Gods, man. They practically own South America. I mean, they taught the Incas everything they know.
I also love, if you watch during the blood test, his reactions are very subtle but fantastic. When MacReady is first explaining the idea and does the first test of it, you can see Clennon's brows furrow, like he's analyzing, thinking, this might actually work. I might be revealed in a second. And then when he's about to do Palmer's blood, he kind of has this resigned kind of, okay, here we go. Like he knows he's about to reveal himself, but can't really do anything about it, so he's getting ready to attack.
Oh, did we establish how long he had been a thing?
It's very unclear. We have that scene with the dog going through the camp and going after something in the shadow, and they actually hired a separate actor so it wouldn't be recognizable as any of the main cast.
Because the first time I saw this movie, I thought that the shadow that the dog had crept up on was Clark, because Clark kept care of the dogs. And there was that moment where the shadow turned around and there was no reaction that the dog was there, like oh, hi dog kind of thing. It was no screaming, no get out of here. And it does go black fairly quickly, but we do have like almost 1 full second where there could have been a reaction to the shadow. So I just thought, naturally, the care of the dogs.
I always thought it was Norris, just from the way the stuntman, I think it was Dick Warlock, who played Michael Myers a few times in some of the Halloween sequels, the way he turns, it looks like Charles Hallahan's gestures, but apparently it wasn't. The only thing we can kind of tell is that both Norris and Palmer hadn't been taken over by the time they visit the flying saucer. Otherwise, we can assume they would have just gotten MacReady right there when they had him. So we can assume one of them was still human in that case. And we know it had taken over at least one person by then because of the shredded long johns that Knowles finds in the trash, or in the kitchen.
Am I the only one who thought they should have just had everybody stripped down? Who's not wearing underwear? And I know that sounds gross, but if I was in that situation, that's the first thing I would have said. If everybody had underwear, we would have been counting underwear.
Well,
who is missing a pair of long johns?
Unless once it's taken over, its first priority is get to my cabin and put some new long johns on.
Right, but that's why you would go back and count the long johns. Who's missing a pair of long johns?
Unless somebody goes, maybe Childs is like, I go commando up here, so.
In which case Childs would get tied up in a chair until everything had resolved.
Next, we come to one of my favorite characters. Joel Polis playing Fuchs, the assistant biologist, the quiet guy with the glasses and the beard.
I liked him. I was sad to see him go. I was hoping he would be one of the ones who lasted.
I like that he's sort of the more sociable version of Blair in that he recognizes the danger they're in, is very grave and solemn about it, but actually tries to do something about it, especially the little bond that he starts to develop with MacReady. I love that MacReady's the guy he trusts. Instinctively, he knows this is the guy I'm allying myself with.
Here's the thing that really bothered me about that interaction. This is the interaction they have in the Caterpillar. At night, outside, when he wants to talk to him alone.
There's something wrong with Blair. He's locked himself in his room and he won't answer the door. So I took one of his notebooks from the lab. Yeah. Listen. It could have imitated 1 million life forms on 1 million planets, could change into any one of them at any time. Now it wants life forms on Earth.
It's getting cold in here, Fuchs, and I haven't slept in
Wait a
2
minute,
days.
Mac, wait a minute. It needs to be alone and in close proximity with the life form to be absorbed. The chameleon strikes in the dark.
So is Blair cracking up or what?
Damn it, McCready, there is still cellular activity in these burned remains. They're not dead yet.
He knows, Fuchs knows at this point that the thing attacks at night. Why risk going outside at night and being trapped in the cat?
When he specifically says is the chameleon strikes in the dark, which I think was meant to be more of a metaphor than anything else, but...
I don't know why somebody would resort to metaphors.
Well, it's Blair's notebook, so he's reading directly. Apparently Blair's a lot more poetic than we thought. But there's little things that Polis does in the part. I love the scene where he's working in the lab and McCready startles him and he just grabs this flask off the table. Like, we can assume maybe there's acid or something in there and he was going to fling it at whoever had tried to attack him in that
As
moment.
the scene ends, we get the close-up on that flask and we never find out what's actually in it.
Instead, it's just a really nice little character detail.
Yes.
And I love how you really get the sense that he's in over his head when Blair is sequestered and he's now the scientific expert and he just feels that he's not up to it at all, but still tries. He comes up with the thing about eating out of cans because he realizes that that's a threat, that they could poison the food with little thing bits. And I really want him to survive. His death is all the worse because we don't know exactly what happened to him, but either way, in fact, pretty much everybody in this movie except for Clark gets it really bad.
It's a pretty horrific death. If we want to assume that he lit himself on fire as he was starting to be attacked, so that if he thought he could kill the monster as it started to consume him, or that the monster got him and then just burned his body rather than take it over.
I actually had another thought, because it seems like the creature is trying to frame McCready as being the thing. And it seems like when it goes past his lab, it's not trying to kill him, it's trying to get him out where he's going to find the shredded clothing. So part of me almost wondered if he finds this shredded clothing, realizes that the guy he trusted the most is one of these creatures, and commits suicide because he just loses all hope at that particular moment.
It's an interesting theory and a lot bleaker than I would have
Just
gone.
because otherwise there's no reason why the creature should attack him at that moment. It wants him to bring this to the others.
So bleak.
Let's move on to Richard Masur as Clark. Masur might be familiar from the Mr. Boogedy TV movies where he's the dad.
Yep.
As well as Nightmares, Head Office, the My Girl movies, and Multiplicity. And I really like his discomfort around people. You can instantly sense why this guy is the animal handler, that he's much more comfortable around these animals than he is around actual people.
He has seen firsthand what this monster is turning his dogs into. And because McCready is shooting his dogs, basically to save them from the pain of living through a horrific death, he attacks McCready because he's putting an end to the suffering of his dogs. It's almost like it doesn't quite click that there's no coming back from this. And I feel for him in that moment.
And then we see his reaction when Blair kills the rest of the healthy dogs, that just traumatized stare in his face. And from that point on, he doesn't speak much. He kind of goes inside himself. And then the one time he really does something is when he tries to kill McCready. It's like you also sense this resentment that he's building with the others, that he's suspected, that he's separated from the others and he's put under suspicion.
You know, not just put under suspicion because he did spend some time alone with the dogs, but because his companions are gone. And as we talked about, God knows how long they were on this base without radio access because their radio has been down. If Clark was not really bonded to any of the other members of the group, but to his dogs, that's even further isolation.
Yeah, he's alone basically from that point on. I love the tiny bit of dialogue when they first discover the blood sabotage and Child's me like, where's Clark? And he just goes right here. Like he knows immediately that he's going to be the first suspect.
Yes.
We have Richard Dysart playing Dr. Copper. Dysart is known for his role as Leland Mackenzie on L.A. Law, as well as parts in movies such as Prophecy, Pale Rider, Wall Street, and Back to the Future 3, and unfortunately passed away this past April. Nearly cast in his part were William Daniels and Brian Dennehy.
I would watch Brian Dennehy in anything.
I know.
So.
And I could picture him pulling off this part, because Copper is a little bit more outgoing and kind of expressive than a lot of the other characters.
Yeah.
And there's something of that old-fashioned kind of military medical man. Like he feels like the kind of doctor you'd find on a naval ship or something. I love that he has this concern for the Norwegians and insists on checking up on their camp. When nobody else really seems to care, that's his priority, to get out there and make sure they're okay.
He has the human well-being the way that Clark has the animal well-being.
How many in their party?
We started with 10. There'd be 8 others left.
How do we know? Guys as crazy as that could have done a lot of damage to their own before they got to us.
Nothing we can do about that.
Oh, yes, there is. I want to go up.
In this weather?
Bennings?
Winds are going to let up a tad next couple of hours. A tad?
But at the same time, he's also a scientist, so once he gets there and sees this destruction, he's grabbing all the papers he can, because it might be important research.
Yeah, and it does turn out to be very important research for them, even though they, just by virtue of letting the dog back in the camp, which was a completely innocent act on their part, they're already doomed. They just wouldn't have known it without those papers.
I also like how offended he is when he's suspected. You don't want to drug me. I'm not a prisoner. That he can't believe as a doctor, he's probably had some level of authority along with Gary. And when that's kind of taken away, he's offended. He doesn't even want Norris to inject him. He's like, no, let me do it.
You're not going to do it right. Just let me do it.
Next is Peter Maloney playing Bennings, the meteorologist. Maloney has also had roles in JFK, Summer of Sam, and as the oblivious doctor who gets Ellen Burstyn hooked on drugs in Requiem for a Dream.
Oh, yeah, that was him.
And he doesn't have a lot of time to kind of let us get a sense of him, but he does get one of the movie's creepiest scenes when he's killed. I mean, that scene of him doing that scream, that is nightmare fuel. That's right up there with the Invasion of the Body Snatchers scream.
It's creepy. The idea that something, like this is a human body, but there's no human in it anymore. The symbol of the mouth hanging open and this unworldly thing coming out of it's just very potent.
It isn't Bennings.
And the reveal of that shot where he's kind of hunched over and pulls back and you start to see that his arms are this pulpy, bloody mass. And he turns and you think he's going to speak. And instead to have that dead stare and just this weird animal noise coming out of it. This idea that it has a human shape, but there is nothing but animal inside of it.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's just absolutely chilling. Interesting, he actually had several different alternate death scenes.
Really?
There was one that was planned but never filmed where it turned out that the other 3 dogs who escaped being assimilated by the thing had bitten it and absorbed bits of it into their stomach and were being absorbed from the inside out and then escaped and had to be chased. And it was a snowmobile chase with McCready, Bennings, and I want to say Childs going out and chasing them, and Bennings gets pulled under the ice by the creature and gets burned alive there.
I'm glad they didn't do that because part of the success of this film is how isolated they are. If you brought them back out into the landscape at that point in the film, it would have opened it up too much.
Yeah, it's also too big a scene. The scale of it would have been, I think, too big for that point in the film. Then they filmed another one, which you can see part of on the deleted scenes on the DVD, where he's walking around the dog kennel and sees something horrific, and then it cuts. And then there's a still of him being stabbed in the neck by somebody from behind. So it's a little bit more of a slasher-style death. And I think that would have come when Blair is on his rampage, that what he saw was the dogs killed by Blair.
I think at that point, if it was a scalpel or was it a knife?
It looked like a chisel or something.
Oh, okay, because I was going to say if it was a scalpel, then we'd get the reveal later on who did it.
And it was decided that when they were kind of testing out the movie, they felt that we had to see one character actually being assimilated and being copied in the process so we could understand it. So they actually came up with that scene while they were on location in British Columbia. It was filmed for the most part outdoors. And it's fantastic. It's one of the signature images of the movie. So.
Yes.
The last of the main crew we're going to discuss is Thomas Waits playing Windows, the young radio operator. Waits also appeared in The Warriors. He's the gang member who gets run over in the subway. As well as Clan of the Cave Bear, State of Grace, and as Harry Stanton on the TV program Oz. And he's kind of that guy you see in any of these movies where you look at me like, this is the guy who's going to crack. You just know it.
Yeah, he was already cracking. He's a radio operator, and he can't fix the radio. So he sits in this room by himself for probably most of his day, and maybe even most of his night, alone in a room. When we see him, he's got dark sunglasses on, and he's just he isn't even fixing anything.
He's just reading a magazine.
He's just sitting there. He's reading a Playboy.
And every time anybody asks him about the radio, all he does is throw these excuses.
U.S. number 31, calling McMurdo. Come in, over. U.S. number 31, calling McMurdo. Urgent. Come in, over. Great.
Come on, come on.
Nobody.
Nobody. Get a hold of somebody. Get a hold of anybody. We gotta report this mess.
Look, I haven't been able to reach shit in 2 weeks. I doubt if anybody's talked to anybody on this entire continent, and you want me to reach somebody.
He seems to have no real talent for his job whatsoever.
No, and he also he's given up.
Yeah.
He doesn't care if the radio works or not. He just wants to go home, and they really have no way to do that at that moment.
I also like that subtle plot point that he's partially responsible for the sabotage of the blood test. That when he sees Bennings, you hear him drop the keys, Gary's keys, and we assume somebody picks them up, or Benning stashed them somewhere for one of the other things. They use that to get in there, somehow get them back to Gary, because once the safe has been broken into and everybody realizes it, there's that great shot of him backing up, kind of panicking, realizing, oh, this is my fault.
But he couldn't say anything, like, oh, I dropped my keys.
Yeah,
but that would put the suspicion right back on him.
So his first reaction is to run, grab a gun, and freak out.
Right.
He also gets another of the film's worst death scenes where he's being eaten by Palmer's, just his head in Palmer's giant, huge jaws. Ugh.
That's pretty awful.
I also love his reaction during the blood test just before he's cleared, that he kind of gives this almost Malcolm McDowell Clockwork Orange stare, like he's about to attack and you're really not sure, all right, is he gonna jump out at him at this second or not? And again, once he is revealed it's okay, that relief of, oh, thank God.
Yeah.
Windows was actually intended to be a nickname because Wade started wearing these huge sunglasses during the costume fittings, and the idea was that these sunglasses were these windows that he viewed the world through, and that kind of became the character name. Originally he was written to be Sanchez, and that was later changed to Sanders, and then they'd recycle that name for the 2011 version later on.
I love that they just call him Windows.
When I was a kid, I couldn't tell if that was a name or a nickname. But
in a way, and this is ridiculous, I'm sorry, but in a way he is a window. He is access to the outside world. Even though he fails at his job and the radio does not work, he is their window.
This comes to another question. How do you feel about the complete lack of women in the cast?
I'm probably going to get a lot of flack for this, but I don't care that there aren't any women in the cast. And I know this would fail outright the Bechdel test, but I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. I don't think it's a good thing. It's a very neutral thing. The story does not necessarily require them to have women in the cast, and if they had cast one woman, that would have made more of a statement in a negative way, because then it would have been pandering.
I agree, and I think it would have added a different dynamic that wouldn't quite have worked for this movie.
I think also the filmmakers would have felt a little too obligated to introduce sexuality.
Exactly.
Where this film is really about isolation and paranoia. And that isn't to say you can't have men and women without sexuality being introduced, but in reality, they're isolated. God knows how long they've been there. If you have a mixed-gendered group, it's going to come up. And we would expect it as an audience to have come up at some point.
It's something they actually added for the 2011 version. They actually do have a couple female characters in that one, and it works okay. But I'm pretty happy with it not being the case here. I mean, even in the 1951 original, they had a couple women in the cast, and of course you do have a romantic subplot there on that one as well. I'm glad they didn't go that route.
I would be much more interested in seeing a part male, part female cast where they handle a very conscious non-use of sexuality. Like, try to do this without a romantic underpinning.
Yeah.
I would like to see that.
All I can hear with this movie is Carl Denham from King Kong. If this movie had love interest, it would have grossed twice as much.
No. Well, I mean, it may have. I don't know.
It wouldn't have been as good a movie, though. It would not have succeeded.
Exactly.
Dramatically as well.
And I could argue as well, if they had had an entirely female cast, this would have worked amazingly as well. And I think they did do a female cast version of this movie in the movie The Descent.
Yes, I agree.
It's a tough question to answer because I feel very strongly about the casting of women in proportion to, the actual population of women on the earth.
Well, it's one of those things where I think it has to fit the film itself.
It does, and there's no saying it could not have, but it would have muddied it up.
I agree. Interesting that we do have at least one sole female cast member in voice only, that being the chess computer, and the voice is provided by Adrienne Barbeau, who was John Carpenter's wife at the time.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And speaking of, let's talk about Carpenter himself. This actually forms the first part of John Carpenter's Apocalypse trilogy. These are all movies that don't necessarily show up but imply some horrific apocalypse. There's this, Prince of Darkness, and In the Mouth of Madness. And watching this, while the ending is ambiguous, you almost get the sense that no matter what happened, they would probably have to nuke that base to prevent this thing from getting out. So there is a real implication that Blair's amazing supercomputer prediction that the world is going to be infected in, 75,000 hours is going to come to pass. Before he was involved, the studio had actually considered Tobe Hooper as director, and he and his partner Kim Hinkle, who had done Texas Chainsaw Massacre together, wrote a script that was a little bit more like Moby Dick, where an obsessed military man was hunting the creature through Antarctica. I'm sure it was an interesting script, but if they had gotten that, we wouldn't have gotten the movie we did get. And at one point, Stuart Cohen had suggested Sam Peckinpah to direct this one, which I think we'd have a lot of slow-motion gooey stuff flying at people.
The thing I love about this film is that it used tension in the frames. It used the tension of the characters to scare the audience. The jump scares were mostly the effects of somebody dying, like they're just big, gross, but those really scary moments where something might be coming out at you, there's nothing there. And then nothing does come out at you.
And they don't really do any fake scares. I mean, there's a couple jump scares that are something important, like that figure walking by Fuchs when he's in the lab. But they don't really do the, cat jumping out of nowhere to scare you. Oh, it's just the cat kind of thing.
Those are cheap.
Yeah. And Carpenter would use those here and there. He certainly used a bunch of them in The Fog, but I'm glad he didn't do that here.
Yeah.
But as for Carpenter, him being a fan of Howard Hawks, you can see exactly why this would appeal to him. Hawks' movies are always about these tight-knit groups of guys fighting a problem, trying to outthink their way through it. A lot of overlapping, clever dialogue. There's a lot of those elements that are in this one that really fit that kind of, almost a modernized version of that type of movie.
I think it would be a mistake not to acknowledge the heavy influence of The Shining on this film. We start out in our first shot. We have this gorgeous aerial view. It's wide, it's big, and I thought instantly of the opening of The Shining when we get to see the mountains and the car in the distance driving into Colorado. Just the same type of open air feel. And then all of a sudden you're in the base or you're in the hotel. So you're in this isolated area and you're isolated by the winter. So there's this coldness on top of it, the danger of nature, so that you are doubly trapped, not just by distance, but by the weather. We have axes, and I know axes are a common instrument of destruction, but there are 2 instances of an axe being used in The Thing that mirror The Shining. The first time you get, when they go to the Norwegian camp, there's a bloody axe in a door. Later on, Childs uses the axe to chop through a door. So, again, that's The Shining. The very creative use of space, the idea that this environment is in itself a character.
The fact that one of the characters sabotages both the vehicles and the communication equipment to further isolate them.
The cat. And I know it's a common winter instrument, but they're both very heavily featured as instruments of salvation in one way or another. Although the cat in The Thing it's not successful.
There's also, while they'd already been using the Steadicam for a lot of their other movies, there's also Carpenter and cinematography team kind of using the Steadicam here as it's used in The Shining, sweeping around corridors, and just the silence of the base later on as things get worse.
And the use of color. I know The Shining's use of color is just legendary. The Thing, our palette, we've got 2 distinctive palettes. We've got orange and red, during our fire scenes and the blood kind of destruction. And then we've got blue and white. So we've got very hot and very cold. And it's stunning. And I would say it's almost reminiscent of De Palma's color usage in a way.
Actually, let's jump to that, the cinematography, because I was thinking of that, the way that the blue and white is used for the exterior, and the red and the warmer tones are used for the interior. And as the movie goes on and more of the camp kind of gets destroyed, the blue starts to bleed into the interiors a lot more.
The outside colors just invade.
There's also the amazing scene inside the Norwegian camp. The scene occurs in bright daylight, but Cundy is able to make this really great shadowy interior for all these scenes with just little pinpoints of light pointing out important details. It's just absolutely fantastic. Or things like the grape pattern in the scene where Blair and Clark are conversing in the dog kennel. Little shadows like that highlight things. Scenes where MacReady will walk into just the right cone of light just to highlight his eyes.
I did want to point out the use of actual on-set lighting. The scene would be dark except for what would naturally be in the room. A character has a flashlight, a character is looking at a computer screen. The use of this sort of light just draws the audience right in. We are in the same environment. We're not using external lights to artificially show the audience what's happening in a dark room.
Yeah, every point of light feels like it has a natural source. Yeah. I also love the split diopter. That's something that Brian De Palma would use a lot. That's something where one half of the screen is in focus, and then they use a special lens to put the other side half of the screen in focus. You can have a character up close and a character in the background, both in perfect focus. Again, like where Fuchs is surprised by MacReady walking up behind him in the lab, and they're both in focus. De Palma was a master at using that to draw your attention to certain things and things sneaking up on other characters, and Carpenter is too. Cundy also worked a lot with Rob Bottin, the special effects artist, when it came to the effects, to make them lit just enough to make them visible while not betraying the fact they're made of rubber. And apparently the two would get into a lot of fights where Bottin would sculpt these amazing things and then want to shoot them in total darkness, and Cundy would be like, no, it's great, let's put more light on it. And they kind of went back and forth until they found just the right balance.
And they did, though. Oh gosh, those creations work now. In an age of just about every monster being digital, these practical effects scare me the most.
They're just very tactile and goopy and visceral. I mean, everything about them. And almost nothing in the movie doesn't work as a special effect. The scene with Norris's head coming off still is flawless. That is an amazing effect.
I can't quite figure out how they managed to make that one work.
And a lot of them were special things where it'd be an entirely complicated rig for one shot, and then an entirely different complicated rig for another shot. There's this legendary story of Bottin setting up the scene where Norris's head rips off, and he put all this weird goop, all these different chemicals into the neck so it would peel and stretch and pop, but didn't really think of what he put in there. He was just putting all this noxious rubber and latex, and then when they're shooting the scene, they had to have one of those flame bars next to it because it's supposed to be on fire. So they're getting ready to shoot it. They're, lighting it. They light it, and boom, the whole thing just explodes. And that was months of work, just poof, gone. And they had to redo the whole shot.
Everybody was okay, though?
Everyone was fine. The puppeteers underneath who were going to be moving the head were a little freaked out.
Yes, understandably.
And then in the next shot, where the head's coming off the desk, you can see the desk has grooves built into it, so they can just have a little rod to bring it down and slide it down the side.
So that the puppeteers can be as far away as possible.
But it's even more amazing when you consider Bottin was 22 when he did this.
Yeah, I feel a lot of ways, because things have become so specialized and you need to go to school for this, that, and you can't work for people who have contracts for this, that, until you've proved all of these things. People who finally get to that level, they've learned, but most of them get to a point where they're afraid to experiment and learn by trial, and so much creativity gets lost in the years of overtraining.
Yeah, Bottin, he came from that generation of makeup artists that would just kind of try anything to get an effect and make it work. He had started out as a protege of Rick Baker, actually.
That makes so much sense.
And worked with Carpenter previously in The Fog, where he created the worm face puppet and played Blake, the tall ghost that confronts Hal Holbrook at the end of that movie. And basically what got him the job is he was the one who came up with this concept that the thing could basically turn into any of these aliens that it had absorbed through all these other planets at any time, and just have a piece of one here, a piece of one there.
Which was one of the most disturbing effects toward the end, when we see all of these things just coming out of it.
It's got part of Blair, it's got the dog, it's got jaws coming out of its shoulder. And when Carpenter asked him, can you do this? Bottin was like, I don't know. I guess we'll find out.
Which is not an answer that would fly these days.
No, it wouldn't. But I mean, it speaks to Carpenter having the confidence in him to let him give it a shot. And he was working so much, though. He was practically living at the studio, and eventually he had to be hospitalized for exhaustion. To the point where one of his effects, the dog creature in the kennel, the first time we see it where it raises its face up and starts screaming, was actually created by Stan Winston as an arm puppet. They came in at the last minute just to do that one effect to help take the burden off of Bottin. And they didn't want credit. They just get a special thanks because they really felt it was Bottin's show.
Oh, that was
which I thought was
nice
very nice
of them. Yeah.
But there's also a lot of really clever techniques they do. Like during the blood test scene, they created this fake hand and petri dish for the moment where the blood jumps out at Kurt Russell. But if you watch carefully, you can see they use that puppet hand for a lot of the negative ones. So it'll just be a shot of Kurt Russell sticking it in. So we get used to it.
Yeah.
And then when it does jump out, it doesn't seem out of place.
That is so smart.
The screenplay was written by Bill Lancaster, the son of actor Burt Lancaster. He actually gained fame for his screenplay for The Bad News Bears. Talk about a completely different genre and tone.
It surprised me. That kind of range is rare.
It is. And I like that just as The Bad News Bears has a happier ending, but it ends in a defeat. And it's interesting that he, as a screenwriter, was willing to do that for both these movies, to not have the pat, happy ending in either case.
And they're both very risky, and it may have been one of his hallmarks.
But as a screenplay, again, it's a screenplay of economy. We don't have a lot of scenes of characters giving us their backstory and long speeches. Characters are defined by how they treat each other, how they behave, how they act. And that's all we really have to
And items
get a
they
sense of them.
interact with. I mean, every single character had something that they always... It was an item touchstone. They always had this item with them. For Kurt Russell's character, MacReady, it was the hat, that ridiculous hat. I love that hat. It fit his character, but it was ridiculous. And the sunglasses for the radio kid.
Palmer with that biker vest that he has.
They all had some kind of personal item that really defined them in a lot of ways.
Blair has that pencil that he's always gesturing with during the scene where he's explaining what the thing can do. Yeah, a lot. Or Copper with the nose ring, which is another great little touch. Most makes him look like a pirate.
Yep.
There's a lot of great little things like that in the screenplay, those little details, yeah. After this movie, Lancaster had been tasked to follow up this with writing the script for Firestarter when John Carpenter was going to direct that one. And I'd love to read that screenplay. I've heard it's very good.
I would have loved to have seen that movie. I really enjoy the movie Firestarter, but I think that it would have been this would have been a different Firestarter that I think I would have enjoyed equally.
And given kind of Carpenter's political bent, I would have been interesting to see what he did with the government conspiracy parts of that movie.
What is his political bent?
Cynical.
Okay,
but
I can see that.
In They Live, you can see he really wasn't a fan of kind of the Reaganomics era
Yeah.
and that kind of conservative bent that America took around that period. Other writers considered to write the screenplay included Richard Matheson, Nigel Neal. I would have been interested to see what he would have come up with on this one, and Logan's Run writer William F. Nolan. Next, we have the music score by Ennio Morricone. Morricone's probably most famous for his music from the movies of Sergio Leone, especially the Man with No Name trilogy, like Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. I mean, you hear a couple tones of that, you know exactly what that is. He also wrote the scores for The Mission and The Untouchables.
And most recently, Tarantino's Hateful Eight.
Which includes a lot of pieces from this score that weren't used.
Yes.
He and Carpenter were kind of at odds over a lot of the score. And Carpenter only used certain pieces. Morricone kind of joked that he only used the pieces that sounded like Carpenter composed them.
I don't agree with that. I think this is definitely a Morricone score. It's beautiful. It's one of the most beautiful scores I've ever heard. And not beautiful in I will relax and listen to this.
You will not relax if you hear it now.
It's a score that you do forget exists, but still influences you as you're watching. But then when you do notice it, it's even, I don't want to say worse, because it's doing its job. It is creepy. It is setting you on edge. While at the same time, it's just so distinctive.
It's very sparse and icy, and it's just very chilly.
It fits the locale.
And has a lot of bits like that are very tragic. When they go to the Norwegian camp, the way the music takes this tragic tone, this feels like something absolutely horrific has happened, and we're just getting the fallout from it. There's a lot of pieces that he composed, and I can understand why Carpenter cut them, because some of them are a little too jazzy, I think they would have jarred with the score as presented in the film. And Carpenter actually had his frequent collaborator Alan Howarth come in to do some synthesizer pieces to join some scenes together, usually ones that are just single low creepy tones.
They really did not get along, did they?
No, not quite. It's actually pretty common. I mean, you look at what happened with Jerry Goldsmith's score for Alien or Alex North with 2001. A lot of times music will just get thrown out or replaced. It still happens to this day, so. The production designer for the movie was John Lloyd, and he had one heck of a task ahead of him, especially when it comes to the Outpost 31 exterior set. They decided to film in Seward, British Columbia, atop a glacier, and they actually started building the set during the summer so that when winter came, it would just get snowed in naturally. But you got to imagine, that would be a tough place to construct, but also especially to film on.
That would be a terrible place to film. I'm sure everybody was cold and that equipment was just... I mean, the wires, I don't think can really withstand being in that kind of cold.
They had problems with the cameras.
Yeah.
But also, just getting up to the set, they had to go up these really slick, icy roads because the roads had been built for a mine that shut down, and they oftentimes have had apparently a lot of close calls where the bus just almost went over the side of the road. So, but there's so many great little details in the set dressing for the interiors, like that great PSA VD sign during the blood test scene where the woman's like, they're not all labeled, and she has a sign that says, "I have VD." A great little metaphor for infection and the idea that you don't know who anybody is at this point.
There are little things here and there, nice touches. Like there's a book in one of the early scenes with MacReady, and the cover of it is "Long Way to Go," which is true. They not only have a long way to go until they get to home, but they have a long way to go to get through what's going to be happening any minute now. There is also board games.
When Windows is killed, he knocks over one cold stay alive, and then when he gets torched, Numbers Up is very prominently visible next to him.
Really just clever things, like there's a box that is labeled "box."
The pinball machine in the rec room that's heat wave.
Yeah. Somebody was having a blast getting the set dressed, and whoever it was, thank you.
And it gives the camp a real lived-in feeling. And I also really love when they have to go down to the generator room in the lower levels, and you just see all this junk there, and it feels like a haunted house movie. All this stuff that's been abandoned and forgotten under the camp, that's been there for God knows how long, God knows why it's down there.
Who knows whose stuff it is? It certainly can't be theirs if it's that old.
It gives it a really creepy vibe for those last few scenes. The editor for the film was Todd Ramsey, and Ramsey does a really superb job increasing suspense through misdirection. One of my favorite examples of this is the scene where Norris is being worked on, and you have MacReady facing off with Childs and Knowles with the flamethrower ready, knowing that any of them can attack him at any instant. And we see this close-up of the scalpel on the table, and somebody picking it up. And if you're paying attention to the geography of the scene, you know who's doing it, but we never get a close-up letting us know it's Clark. But the way he keeps intercutting it, we think, okay, this guy is about to attack MacReady, and all of a sudden, boom, then we get the cut to Norris being operated on and the chest opening up.
Yeah.
It's a great sense of the threat is over here, no, it's over here.
Plus, the hand with the scalpel is way in the forefront. It is right in our face. Even though it's off to the side, it is to the left, whereas MacReady is in the center, but further away from our point of view. So this knife is in our face this whole scene, so we sense this danger literally in our face, but the danger is behind us.
And then that pays off in the next scene where MacReady's having a face-off with Childs, and Ramsey puts in just enough shots to let us see Clark edging toward MacReady, and then for us to forget about him, and then he charges at him and MacReady fires. Again, a great shock. We expect he and Childs are about to fight, and then boom, no, it comes from Clark. Let's talk about some of the stuff that didn't make it into the movie. Besides the alternate death for Bennings that we talked about, there was also an extended scene during the blackout where the lights go out in Fuchs' lab that I guess just visually didn't look right, and Carpenter decided had to be cut out. Fuchs was actually killed in an entirely different way in the original cut of the movie. He was impaled on a shovel and on a door. But again, they decided it wasn't dramatic enough, and I think the decision to have Fuchs either burn himself or get burned was a lot better. And they actually did film an alternate ending for safety. While they had Kurt Russell around, they shot a scene that implied that he had been rescued. It was apparently this long single shot down this hallway of this hospital that would have revealed MacReady alive in this room, getting the blood test and proving that he's human. It's never been seen by an audience. They never test screened it, but they did film it just in case. There was also one other cut subplot I almost wish they had kept, where it turns out that Palmer and Childs have been growing marijuana on the base. and
then the monster gets into it and turns into a big pot plant. And this is an entirely different movie.
It's a little bit of an homage to the original Thing, where they have those little seedlings growing and drinking blood. But they tearfully have to burn it because they realize it might have been infected. And Palmer's just like, no, we can't.
As much as I love that, it didn't fit the tone of the film.
Yeah. Let's talk about the big ending. Now, do you think that either Childs or MacReady are infected in the final scene?
How will we make it?
Maybe we should.
If you're worried about me.
If we've got any surprises for each other, I don't think we're in much shape to do anything about it.
Well, what do we do?
Why don't we just wait here for a little while? See what happens.
Every time I see this film, I wonder which one is. And then just before we go to black, I decide it doesn't matter. They're going to die anyway.
Part of me thinks it matters at least for the peace of mind of either one who's human, because it would be nice for them to die knowing that they did stop it and they don't have to worry about it going on and killing everybody. But
I think it's a tough thing, because sometimes it's like asking if I think the top was falling at the end of Inception. I don't think it matters if it did or it didn't. I think what matters is that we don't know. And putting us in the position of not knowing puts the audience, us, in the very same position those characters are in.
I will admit, I tend to think that Childs isn't, because he has the flamethrower, and if he wanted to, he could just torch MacReady right there. So part of me thinks at least Childs might be human. I do like that there's that long gap between the explosion and MacReady wandering around makes us think he could have been found by the creature and taken over. So there's still that possibility. In the script, there actually would have been an extra beat where MacReady happens to find an old chessboard lying around and sets it up between him and Childs so they have one last game as they're freezing to death.
I think that would have been lovely, but also a little too on the nose, since this entire... And we get the chess game very early on. I think revisiting it would have been a little too much.
All right, let's talk about the depiction of paranoia in the movie. There's this great setup where you kind of take any group and inform them that there's an enemy among them, and then just wait to see what happens. And it often comes out that the so-called normal people, the ones who should be okay, turn out to be just as dangerous, if not more so, than the enemy you're fighting. And we see that in this movie with how everybody starts to gang up on MacReady once they start to suspect that he's one of them. They're just as dangerous to him as the creature. And it's especially heightened by the isolation of this location. They can't flee, they can't turn to some higher authority to sort things out. This is it. It's up to them.
They're in a situation ripe for paranoia and violence.
And I think the idea of imitation also can kind of represent the unknowability about people, that there can be people that you think you know and think you trust, and one day they can turn on you or do something that's totally unexpected and not in your best interest.
Yeah, the monster within.
And of course, in the modern age, we can look at this as sort of a precursor to the idea of identity theft.
Yeah.
This idea that someone will take your name and your persona and go running around doing damage with it.
Which we can say even Body Snatchers did the same thing.
And of course, since this movie was produced in the early 1980s, the AIDS virus was just becoming known to the public right about now. So the blood test scene in particular would have extra resonance right around then.
Yeah. I know you mentioned the part that bothers you the most is when the scalpel that's been used to draw blood is used over and over with just a wipe on a pair of jeans to sterilize.
All right, even if you weren't dealing with a creature that can be microscopic and just a little bit of blood can infect you, you don't just wipe it on your pants. You get a new scalpel, goddammit, Windows.
Oh, Windows.
A couple of little interesting trivia notes. You'll notice the Universal logo doesn't appear at the beginning of the movie.
I did, and I was speculating about why not. My guess was because we're starting out with a spacecraft coming to the planet Earth, and we see both it and the planet Earth in that very first scene, it feels like Universal may have wanted to distance their logo from an alien attack.
Well, that's pretty close. They were afraid it might confuse the audience to have it go from one, the Earth and then the Earth again.
Yeah.
There actually had been talk of having the logo, the name Universal disappear, and then the ship just come into the shot and doing it all in one single shot.
Universal has done some pretty incredible stuff with their logo through the years.
And a lot of movies have kind of tweaked the logo. I remember Serenity, where the Universal name disappears, then Earth kind of decays, and the ships start flying out from under it, yeah. Another thing, you'll notice that we never see Wilford Brimley himself in any of the exterior shots. We always see him like in a coat with his face hidden. That's because Wilford Brimley never actually traveled to British Columbia to do those scenes.
Interesting. Was it for health reasons, or was he contracted to something else?
I think it was just a case of they realized they could do all of that stuff with a double, that we never really had to see much of him. So they just got a stuntman with the big coat and the hood pullover, and it worked fine.
Yeah.
But as a result, the famous cast photo of everybody gathered around the helicopter for the crew shot, he's missing. And any of those times when all the crew is gathered outside, he's missing, which makes it funny when they're burning the corpse and you're like, where's Blair?
Every time in the beginning when we saw just like more than 6 people, I'm like, is that all of them? Like, nope. Is that all of them? Nope.
Shot's almost over, you're like 9, 10, 11, wait.
Never all of them, because we only get up to 11, and that really annoyed me.
Well, that brings up a point. In terms of the directing, the blocking of scenes in this is
gorgeous
really
blocking.
good. The reveal of the safe being broken into, and the camera pans through, and it just lets us see everybody's face as we need to, as they start speaking or they become the focus of the scene. Very carefully choreographed and very tricky. It just skirts with that 180 rule.
When we see just about all of the characters, I think that's around the time we have about 7 of them on screen outside for the first time. Most of them, I would say 5 or 6 of them, we only see from the back. It is so risky. That can go so wrong as far as blocking goes, because everybody's covered up. You don't see who's doing what or who's who, but it works because suddenly we're in this sea of people who are just all covered up. They are not revealed, and they're never revealed. We don't know who's who or who's a monster, so there's these layers that just start up right away.
As we were watching, I remember you mentioned during the Blair's attack scene, that great shot that lets us really quickly get the sense of the geography of where everybody is in that scene.
It's one of my favorite scenes. It's a T section, so the very foreground is a parallel shot, and the intersection for the T is straight down the center to the horizon. The characters, there are 2 or 3 of them that are sort of shown from the back profile or the side, or they're up against the wall, and there are others that are crouched in the hallway in different ways. And you can tell this space is so cramped and it is so tight that we can't even get everybody in here so everybody's safe. It's just a wonderful shot.
And there's a lot of that too in the dog kennel scene where McCready and Clark are coming in, and McCready's kind of look to the left, lets us know, okay, that's where these characters are coming in, and that Childs comes in directly across from them and gives us the geography of this really small space just when we need it.
And there's something thematically we didn't talk about when it came to the dog cage scene I wanted to touch on really quickly. When the alien dog is put in the cage, we're given this first taste of how this is going to play out. I mean, the alien is in there. The alien is one of them. The alien looks just like them and lashes out at them one by one. And they're trapped. They're isolated. They cannot get out. There is no way out. To the point where one of the dogs tries to chew through metal to get out.
And I like that we see different reactions. That one tries to chew through metal. One starts growling at it immediately and almost ready to attack it.
Yep.
Like the men, each of them reacts differently.
And I did try to count how many dogs there were. I was hoping there would be an even 12, but I never got a good count on it because it's its own story within a story.
That would have been perfect.
Yeah.
Though. To save costs, they did a couple of really clever things. The same helicopter was used for both the Norwegian and the American helicopters. They just changed the lettering on the sides of it, and you'll notice that we see one helicopter generally from one side and one from the other. Also, the camp itself, the main exterior set, was reused. Once they blew it up for the finale, they filmed the Norwegian camp scenes there. So they just used the same destroyed camp for the exterior of that.
What a way to cut costs and to save resources that I didn't even know that had been done, because the way they shot everything,
just the right angles,
it looked completely different.
Also, going back to how I first saw it broadcast on TV, I remember there was a lot of different stuff in there. At the beginning of it, they actually included narration explaining who each character was, or using footage from different scenes.
Which would have been very useful for me, who got very easily confused by all the characters. But in doing that, you take away from that initial overwhelming feeling from all these characters.
And the slow reveal of who each one is. It had this really awkward voice going, Blair, biologist. MacReady, hates the cold, loves the money. I mean, they took most of the descriptions right out of Lancaster's original script.
Awful. Hates the cold, loves the money.
Yeah.
That's awful.
All the descriptions were taken out of Lancaster's first page of the script, which is just a really quick description of each one.
Loves his dogs, hates the humans.
Loves his dogs. Loves his dogs.
Ew.
They also reused some footage from the opening scene of the dog running away to imply that the thing escaped as a dog and was going to run off and go attack somebody else. And then had the voice pretty much do the keep watching the sky speech from the end of the original 1951 movie. And it was really awkward. When I rented this finally so I could see it uncut and that wasn't in there, I was like, oh, wait a minute. You can see it on YouTube and it's really bad.
You'll have to put a link to that.
Carpenter did not approve of that. He was not happy with that, and I don't blame him. Actually, let's talk about a couple little things that reference the original 1951 version.
Sure.
The main title, the way the title burns into the screen, is directly out of the Christian Nyby version. That was actually accomplished with a big tank full of smoke, and they did kind of a stencil of the Thing title and then stretched basically trash bags over it and then just ignited the trash bags so they burned away. They shined a light through it and it would illuminate the smoke and just have the Thing title.
What a wonderful...
it's so logical when you hear it.
It's logical, but at the same time, who comes up with this?
I don't know, but it looks fantastic.
It looks wonderful. It looks it's obviously not digital, but it looks like something we would create now digitally. So it makes sense watching it. You're like, oh, that's a really great scene, but you don't think what goes into something like this.
Yeah. There's also, of course, during the review of the Norwegian video, we get the shot of all of the Norwegian crew in a circle on the ice making the shape of the flying saucer, which is one of the iconic scenes of the original 1950s movie.
Yeah, when I first saw that scene with the Norwegians all in a circle, that freaked me out. That was creepier than a lot of other things in the film. The idea that they would just be standing there pretty equidistant, these black figures,
one of them
on
waving
white
at camera
snow,
too, yeah.
You know one of these people is going to be infected. So seeing this video as the U.S. crew is seeing the video, you wonder which one of them.
Which one is going to be infected after that video is taken.
Yes.
And, let's talk about the legacy of the movie. As we mentioned, it had the misfortune of being released 2 weeks after E.T. in the same weekend as Blade Runner. And the weird thing is that so many horror fans didn't like the movie. Carpenter was particularly stung because Christian Nyby, the director of the original, really didn't like it either and criticized it. And the movie was such a disaster and so reviled by critics, they were calling Carpenter a pornographer of violence, that he was fired from doing Firestarter. So we lost that potentially fascinating version of that movie.
Our vision of what we see as a horror film has changed so dramatically that to call him a pornographer of violence is absurd. The graphic scenes that we see are the true kind of horror that you would see from an alien of this sort. We don't see anything that's too graphically over the top. We don't see characters needlessly mutilating each other.
And it fits story. Like, the whole thing with the head coming off, it's a great effect, but it's also the key thing that lets MacReady realize that the blood test is going to work, that the separate part is its own entity. And you also look at other movies that shocked audiences, like, say, Scanners with the head blowing up or Alien, and it seems like directors were allowed a little bit of that. If you did too much of that, then you were horrible. But just enough, just a tiny bit to shock viewers, and you were okay, you were in the safe zone. And Carpenter very gleefully went over that, and to boot threw in a really nihilistic, unhappy ending, and I guess that just really hit people the wrong way. And it's a shame because it feels like it really affected Carpenter in other ways. He just kind of felt kind of broken by that for a while. And he did other great movies after that, but I don't know if he ever quite recovered the mojo he had before that. Because it must have been just soul-killing to have this thing that he still regards it as one of his best movies, if not his best.
I agree with him. It is one of my favorites of his.
He was cursed to be kind of ahead of his time with this, with Big Trouble in Little China, so many of his movies that weren't appreciated when they came out. And then years later, people kind of clued in on them. It, of course, has been a cult classic. It's actually watched annually by the personnel of the Amundsen Scott South Pole Station in Antarctica.
That's morbid, but amazing. I think it's great. How do you put it? Like, I think it's hilarious, but also very, very morbid that people who are very isolated would make themselves watch this movie about isolation and paranoia.
I just picture them watching it, like, holding up a beer going, truth, man, truth.
That's me right there. I'm that character.
While the film never got a sequel, it inspired a lot of other spin-offs in media. There were several comic series by Dark Horse Comics that continued the story. There was a video game released in 2001 with an American team investigating the aftermath of the Outpost 31 incident, where we actually see what happened to Childs and McCready, and Carpenter has stated that he considers the game canon because he really liked it.
Oh, really?
Yep.
Oh, we'll have to play that.
There was a sequel miniseries that was being developed by the Sci-Fi Channel with Carpenter's blessing, where they were going to try and get Keith David and Kurt Russell back and explain why they looked older, because they had frostbite and had operations to help fix their face, and that's why they looked years older.
That's sloppy, honestly. I mean, I wish that we could have gotten a sequel if they wanted to do one right after. I don't necessarily like sequels, especially if movies feel fully done. If they are encapsulated, they are done. Just one movie is perfect, and we do live in a time where people think in terms of franchises, and those can be poison. Though, I mean, films that really should only have one film are turned into 3 or 4, and they're watered down and they're gross. And I do feel like we end up getting a lot of rehashing because the studios don't want to take a risk on original material that doesn't have a built-in fan base.
Yeah.
So if you're going to do a sequel, you do it as soon as possible when your original cast is still the age they are, or just don't call it a reboot, but use that, say, 50 years later, a U.S. team goes down there and discovers the bones of whatever.
Right.
Don't try to write off somebody aging with something as sloppy as a facial transplant or plastic surgery.
Yeah, part of that was this, they really wanted to get those two back.
It's sloppy.
Yeah. And even then, I think it would have been better just to say they got rescued, it's years later, we'll start
exactly
from there.
Years later they have to revisit the case. I don't know.
It also inspired the first season X-Files episode Ice, which has a very similar setup where people are infected by this prehistoric parasite that turns them psychotic, and even includes an homage shot of the camp that's directly from this movie. And, of course, in 2011, there was the prequel reboot discussing what happened at the Norwegian camp. And while it didn't get a lot of good reviews, I still like it. I think it takes the story into more of a political dimension.
I didn't see it, mainly because I do have a lot of... I'm really sick of prequels and sequels, and I will eventually see it, especially because, well, it's winter. And winter-based isolation stories are best in the winter.
It suffers in comparison to the original, but it does, I think, do a couple of unique, interesting new things. And Mary Elizabeth Winstead's really good in the lead part of it.
She's an excellent actress.
Also, it's worth checking out. There's a great short story called The Things by Peter Watts based on this movie. It was actually a Hugo nominee that retells the story from the point of view of the creature, but sets it up as this idea that the creature isn't this horrific, malevolent entity. It's really disappointed and can't understand why these humans are trying to kill it and don't want to be joined with it and unified as this one being.
That's very Borg-like. It's really a fascinating entry point into the story. I don't know necessarily that I would want to read it, but I do kind of enjoy the idea.
It's a cute, quick read, and I do like how it handles the idea of a completely, literally alien point of view of how the world functions, that it can't understand how these single, isolated beings work. It just has no point of reference.
Or why they would want to continue to be isolated.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, well, we get to the fun stuff. What is your favorite scene?
My favorite scene was that whole section when Blair's freaking out and destroying all of the radio equipment, and there's chaos, and he's screaming all of these things that the other people should be listening to what he's saying, because what he's saying is very, very important, but all they can hear is that he is screaming, he is freaking out, and he is destroying all of their resources to the outside world.
You guys think I'm crazy? Well, that's fine. Most of you don't know what's going on around here. Hold on, damn well. Sure, some of you do. You think that thing wanted to be an animal? No dog's making 1,000 miles to the coast. No, you don't understand. That thing wanted to be ours. Still gets out. Imitate everything on the face of the earth.
That scene serves so many purposes. It sets up the question as to whether Blair is crazy or a monster, and these are big questions, and further isolates the cast. It gets all of them together, realizing that they're in big trouble. And I think even though they've already seen the monster, they've seen what the monster can do, I don't think they really understand how deeply in trouble they are until one of their most rational members loses it.
And that's the shock, that looking at it from the outside as it starts, Blair seems to be the one who'd be least of a physical threat.
Yeah.
And to suddenly see him wielding an axe and a gun and terrifying everybody in the camp, it is a shock. And sets you up for this idea that out of nowhere, you can get danger from the most unlikely place.
Mm-hmm.
And also, I have to note, at the very end of the scene, after MacReady punches him out, we see Fuchs kind of fall backward.
Yes.
And it feels like they should have added a Foley effect of a splat or something.
Or a Wilhelm scream or something. It was ridiculous, because he doesn't look like he was thrown back or he fell back. He just kind of looked thrust back, like, oh, I wasn't supposed to be in the scene.
Well, especially because it comes after his, oh, good shot, MacReady. Thump.
Yeah.
For me, it used to be the big Norris coming apart scene, but I'd have to say, now watching it, it's the scene where MacReady sneaks back into the camp after they suspect he's one of them, and they throw open the door, and there he is with the dynamite and the flare.
Anyone messes with me and the whole camp goes. Come on, child, burn me.
Put those torches on the floor and back off. Back off. Way off. You asshole.
You'd have done the same thing.
Don't argue with him.
This idea that he is now so desperate that he knows that everyone's against him and that any second any of these people could attack him, that he's ready to take them all out with one shot. That's really scary. You sense the exhaustion of the character, how on edge he is, and also the fact that since at that point we're not supposed to be totally sure if he has been taken over or not, they do subtle things with the frost makeup on him to make him look really creepy and ghostly.
Oh, they do. He looks like he's been out in that wilderness for years. Like, he has come back. He's an aged man. He's much wiser and crazier and wild.
And the fact that he's still shaking off the effects of it for the next few scenes, that thing where he's flexing his hand trying to get the feeling back into it after he nearly froze to death outside.
And they mentioned something about, nothing human can make it back here without a tether. And of course he does. And we're not certain whether or not he is human. Even though he goes to the point of blowing up the place, we're still not sure.
Yep. Well, they should have known that it's not because whether he's human or not, it's because he's Kurt Russell. Kurt Russell can do anything.
Yes, Kurt Russell will always find a way home.
Okay, what are your recommended titles for this one? What else do you think people would like if they enjoy this
I've
film?
mentioned both of them already. I'll reiterate. The Shining, the Kubrick one, the themes are very, very similar. Paranoia, panic, the other, and isolation, just soaked in that film. And The Descent, which, again, is you think you're getting into one type of film, a group of girls who've decided to go cave exploring for a weekend, and you come out with a completely different film that I don't want to spoil. So if you haven't seen it, definitely check it out. If you're a horror fan, if you like the idea of the other and isolation and paranoia, just go for it.
Although I would suggest the unrated version with the original ending is probably the better way to go.
Yeah. Don't mess around with the other ending.
All right, I am going to go for 3. One in terms of paranoia is Frank Darabont's adaptation of The Mist.
That's a great choice.
That one is another one that shows that, yes, there's these horrific creatures that are attacking these people in this isolated location, a supermarket, but the real threat comes from the other people and how paranoid they get and how each of them has different ways they think of they're going to be able to survive the crisis. I'd also say, if you're looking for another really good, creepy, wintry horror movie, the film of 30 Days of Night with Josh Hartnett. Again, you have that very creepy sense of isolation, and also as these vampires are attacking and turning people into them, this idea of your apparent friends becoming the threat. And the last one, this one's going to be a little strange, is the Werner Herzog documentary Encounters at the End of the World, which is his interesting look at all these different people who live and work in Antarctica. And I think at the beginning of this movie where we get this strange cast of characters, you kind of wonder to yourself, how did they all end up here? What are their reasons? Why would they take this kind of job separated from everybody? And that movie kind of gets into that with a whole bunch of different people and their different lifestyles and points of view, and it's really fascinating.
I think that's a wonderful suggestion.
Plus, the photography, like with this movie, the photography of the landscapes is absolutely gorgeous. All right, that ends our conversation, but not the discussion. If you'd like to have your say about the thing or feel that we missed something, check out the comment section for this episode on cinemaspection.com and start talking. Email your comments, complaints, questions, and suggestions to cinemaspection@gmail.com. You can also like our Facebook page and follow us on Twitter. Our show is available on iTunes and Stitcher, so if you like what you hear, please subscribe to us, and if you have a moment to spare, please leave us a review. We appreciate any feedback you can offer, and your reviews help improve our visibility. We'll be back to discuss another movie next time. Until then, remember to keep watching closely. There's more to a movie than just what's on the screen.
First goddamn week of winter.